Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing really well. I'm doing well. And yourself?
It's a journey, but I'm getting there. Thank you for asking. So, may I
Mhm.
ask you to tell us your name?
Sure. My name is Tiffany Wilson.
Lovely. And may I call you Tiffany?
You may.
Thank you. And Tiffany, will you tell us a little bit about yourself? Anything you feel comfortable sharing about you?
Sure. Well, I'm a mother of 6-year-old twins, going to be 7 in July. So, that's a big part of who I am right now.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it's been fun. A boy and a girl too. So, I'm a sociologist. So, right? I think a sociological lens to have a female and a male at the same time, especially juxtaposed against everything you learn in academia, right? As sociology, it's just been super fascinating to be a mother, and just a joy, such a joy.
It
So
goes
yeah, I'm a
fast,
soci.
doesn't it?
Oh my gosh, it goes so fast. I mean, so recently I had to go through every single picture and video that I have taken of my kids because I was my backup of my computer wasn't working. Anyway, I'll spare the details. And just right, like some of those things just felt like yesterday, like a blink of an eye. They're just such different people, and you see how quickly it happens. So yeah, I'm trying to lean in. I'm trying to lean in and remember, right, that that's a very important identity that I need to spend time spend time with, right? Especially I feel like in the world that we live in today, there's so much about who we are professionally, and that's the foot forward, right? And not the personal, and to separate the two, even though the two are very much intertwined. So I've been on a personal journey to, as you can see, kind of understand the different identities that I have, and what it means to be operating from a place of those identities. So I'm a sociologist, I'm a researcher. I do social research and evaluations. So I've been working with social research methods, which are things like focus groups, interviews, observation, survey research, secondary research, literature reviews, for about 18 years now. And for the past 12, really in an evaluative capacity. And I work predominantly with nonprofit organizations, school districts. I do some work for foundations, community groups that aren't technically a nonprofit. I really like collaboration and coalition spaces where you have a lot of different multi-sector folks coming together to look at a campaign policy issue. Um, that's work that I find very edifying. And since about 2015, as a result of some work that I was doing and a space that I was sitting in, really started taking a journey to understand what it means to be an equity-based researcher, and to bring that lens. Well, it's more than just a lens, right? But to understand what that means. And in that, the folks that I work with have really shifted. So my work has shifted in a response to the shift that I've been doing there. I'm an advocate. So I used to be a land use planner. And when I moved to Sacramento, it was the height of the recession. Planning was not happening. And so I decided to engage in that through advocacy. And actually, I'm quite pleased now. I think that was a very opportune kind of forced, because I think I'm a better advocate than I was a professional planner. I just think advocacy aligns more with the work. Um, and so, yeah, I guess I'll stop there.
So that's a wonderful story, and I have tons of questions, but I want to go back to the babies. So did you know you were going to have twins? Did you plan to have twins, or was that kind of accidental?
No, so it was fertility. I had tried for 8 years to have children unsuccessfully. And so when you're in the fertility, it's the chance of multiples are just so much higher.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, when you first go through the process, you don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I knew pretty early on that it was twins.
Yeah. So my daughter I had through natural means. And I have two only children, so one is 20 years older than the other.
Okay.
My daughter probably
Oh,
killed me for even remarkably talking about her age, but so I have two only children. So when I married the second time, for 5 years, he didn't want to have kids. I'm over it. Don't want kids. It's good, right? Like, okay. One day he wakes up and he says, I want to have a son. And I'm like, they have those at the Goodwill. Go down there and see if you can find one before they all get away. Because by that time, I was in my late 30s. Like I'm not having a baby. I've gone too long. The pipes are rusty. And oh yeah, and so eventually we did in vitro, and they said we're going to have 6. They only had 1. That one pushed all the rest out. Okay, and I
Oh my goodness.
I tell them that story all the time. You just pushed all the rest out, and it was just 1. So I appreciate that. That's very good to know. I tell you, it is a bit traumatic. I don't know if this is your case, but the doctor said you may have to make a decision about elimination. And, you could think of elimination in a couple of ways. You lost your job, you may have to go to the bathroom, the different terms that you could use for, but elimination of one of your children is not a term that you can even process, so you mean I've gone this long journey and you want me to decide to get rid of some of them? I cannot, if it was different, like my husband says all the time, what would we have done if we had had 6 children? We'd have probably lost our minds, but it would have been a joyful loss, right? We would have enjoyed losing our minds, right? So I appreciate that. And I always tell women who go through that journey, you make the decision that's best for you. Don't let anyone else influence your decision. Make the one that's best for you. So I appreciate that. So I want to talk a little bit about your career. So first of all, tell us, what is a sociologist and what type of work does that person do? I know you just described the work that you have done, but is that typical of what a sociologist does?
I mean, it can be, right? I feel like sociology can have a lot of different applications. So my husband's actually teaches sociology. So if he goes back and watches this, anyway, it's just he stays very much in the academic vernacular, right? Whereas I'm very removed from that. So it's interesting to hear us both kind of talk about the discipline. So to me, how I would frame up sociology is it's the study of society, right? So you're looking at these we're looking at data that's talking about kind of the overarching state of the world, if you will. For me, a lot of the coursework that I did was focused on looking at data about the disparities between, white folks and people of color. So employment outcomes, education outcomes, and looking at that historically, right? Not just a point in time. I took a really fascinating class that was looking at those disparities in relationship to waves of immigration, and not just waves of immigration, but colonialism, slavery. And so understanding how the policies and the structures that we put in place perpetuate these inequalities. You also look at the dynamics of marriage and family, and how, the different kind of social norming, you will, around what it means to be a family, and how policies can impact the support for different families, how different families look. You have some folks that are theorists, right? So they're creating theories around like groupthink and how mob mentality comes to be, or some of the most famous folks, like, which I don't necessarily, I think a lot of different disciplines kind of claim them, but Marx or Weber, who are looking at the kind of unit of production and the worker, if you will, and what that means to kind of have a class of people that are really controlling the means of production, and the disparities and income inequality that come out of that. So I guess for me, I would say overarchingly, right, it's the study of society. But not from not from the lens of like a geographer or an anthropologist. So I guess, as I'm talking about it, I'm like, I feel like I need to go back and refresh myself about what it means to be a sociologist. So sociologist, a big part of what you can learn in sociology is what we call research methods. So how can you go out into the world and use these methods to collect the data that you need to understand this research question that you have, be it, so what's the best methodology? So surveying is a big part of the research methods, or interviewing or focus grouping. What's going to be the best methodology to help you collect the data that you need to understand your question about society. And also within the discipline can be evaluation. So I did take an evaluation course in my graduate program, which is understanding, looking at a program, a campaign, something, and taking this lens of how is this really working well? What are the strengths of this? And then where are the opportunities to increase the impact, so that it could be used as evaluative. I know some sociologists that get into politics. You can teach. I think it's a very broad discipline, and then when you use research methods, you can even marketing. Marketing can become a profession. So you're not necessarily trained as a marketer or communications person, but you have the methodology, the research skills that a lot of different disciplines use. So I think it's very adaptable. I think you can do a lot of different things with sociology. I'm a fan, right? I'm one of those people when I'm talking to someone, I'm like, oh, you should check out. I think it's a quiet discipline that can fit in a lot of places, I think, in my perspective.
I think that's an excellent definition. I would say two things in correlation. So people of color are all people. If you're trying to specify minorities or marginalized communities, then you need to say that. People of color is an encompassing term, and every single discipline I've ever seen said that white is a color. So unless you are excluding white people, then you should say specifically the group that you're talking about, even in your research, because when you lump people together in this category, you exclude more likely than include. So I try to tell people to move away from people of color. I don't know who invented that term and why they invented it, but it is meant to marginalize Black and brown communities, simply that. And I've gotten pushback from people saying, oh, well, some people don't identify as Black and brown. Then be whatever it is that you identify, but don't allow people to marginalize the rest of us that do not identify as a person of color. I am not. I am a Black woman. And I think that it's offensive to a large swath of minority communities to be identified as a person of color or a community of color or a student of color. We're all of color. The question is, what is your color? So I just want to add that.
I apologize if I offended. I apologize.
That's quite all right. And then, so my doctorate degree is in higher education administration, which means I could go run a university. Never hope that ever happens to me, but that's what my degree is. We spent 2 years on research and research methods. And so my dissertation was on what is the requirement for a student to complete a fully online course, i.e. a Coursera course or whatever, as a degree. Like, so I'm gonna get a degree, a BA in humanities on a tool like Coursera, and whether students complete it. And this was at the height of this. So I completed my dissertation and I graduated my doctorate degree in 2016. At the time, online courses had just come, like they had been around, but they really started to make an impact because universities were, partnering with Coursera or edX or whomever. They're partnering with all these other companies. And so a lot of people were considering online courses because they were either free or very cheap. The barrier to entry was low. So there were a lot of pieces that made online classes look really, really good. The problem with online courses, and you know this probably better than I do, statistics can say anything you want it to say, right? You can fool around with your statistics and make the world be upside down instead of right side up. You can do a lot with statistics. So one of the pieces that really helped me in my dissertation was the research method. So I did no surveys, no questionnaires. I did strictly student data across 20 universities, north, south, east, west. I just randomly picked, and I just, work with their dean of students or their academic departments to get this data of completion rates for online courses. And then I went to Coursera and edX, and there were a couple of others that were around at the time, and got their completion data. And what's really amazing about that is so it's a funny story. So one of my children was at I was defending my dissertation. And I got so frustrated because they rejected my dissertation for one word. This 1,700-page document that I had been writing for a year, one word. Wow. And I walked out, in a huff, I just walked out. And my son is sitting there and he says, Mom, you've come too far to turn back now. So I realized the value of research methods in getting at what your goal is. So that's very helpful to know. And do you, every project, every organization you work with, do you use research methods to determine who they are and whether you should partner with them, or is it just simply looking at a very specific subset of data and working from that?
I'm not, so
So in other words, do you like, let's just say if I call you up and I say,
sure.
Tiffany, I need help. And this is a true statement. I started this company to teach marginalized computing to teach marginalized communities how to get into computing or information technology. And so if I were to say, hey, Tiffany, I'm thinking about doing this, how would you assess whether I would make a good customer? And two, once you decided if I was a good customer, where you thought you could do the most help for me?
Okay. So the first thing that for me is the nature of the work. So there's certain things I like to do, certain things I don't like to do. You know, the fact that you're trying to help marginalized youth is experience that I have. I think there's also that, right? Like, do I have experience with this? Am I well qualified to do this work for you, right? So if there's a content that I feel like doesn't necessarily align with my skills or my interest, or I would refer you to someone else. Then there would be a process of talking with you about the way that I do the work, you know, how I do my methods, how I see folks that I work with as partners, you know, how I see my position in that work. You know, which for me is I'm not a content expert in that, right? You're the expert. So I come to the table with the skills and the assets that I have to help understand a question. So to me, it's a very partnership based approach. So I make sure that the folks that I work with understand that, and that's the type of researcher or evaluator that they want to work with. You know, some folks really want someone to just kind of take it for them, right? And they want a very low level of engagement in it. I talk about the process of creating the research question, creating the tools. You know, I very much like to have the folks that I'm working with weighing in on it throughout the process and telling me if, you know, this questioning works, or you know, if we're gonna, whatever it is, be it focus groups or observations or secondary data analysis, that whatever the tools are that we've created around, well, first, like, what I think this is the right methodology because this will help us understand this. How do you feel about that, right? Does that resonate with you? Does that make sense to you? So it really starts with an understanding of how I do the work, and making sure that it's a good fit. And then from there, yeah, just again, as the project moves along, you know, you know, hopefully being in relationship, because I also need the person to trust me, right? And to understand, if there's not trust, then I just don't know if it works in a very functional way. And so, yeah, then from there, it just becomes a partnership. And talking through, you know, again, like, what is what you want to know? Is this the research question that resonates with you? I think this is the best way to get at that data. Does that make sense for you? I've created these tools. Can you please look at them and tell me if you feel like when we go out into the world and we try and collect the data, that the folks that we're going to be working with, that's going to resonate with them. It's going to be something that they can engage with, and not something where, you know, it's like language that just isn't it. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I think for our listeners, you know, you may have a lot of people trying to hire you now that they can say, oh, this is what this person does. So that's a really great thing. So why sociology? So of all the disciplines you could have chosen from, why sociology?
Oh, that's such a great question. So at the time, when I first got into school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. No idea what I wanted to do. You know, I'm just always impressed with people who do. And I was actually a political science major. And so I was about, I mean, as far as you can be, a year and a half into a bachelor's degree, right? Like, there's a lot of GE requirements and things that you have to take. And I had done some kind of floating around with different disciplines. And I was also at the time a environmental advocate. So I was doing a lot of work. I grew up in Oregon, Portland area. So I was doing a lot of work around trying to protect the old growth forests from logging interests. I mean, yeah, the old growth, specifically where the old growth were and the protected species were around streams, et cetera. And also at the time was starting to really understand land use planning. And so I was reading plans where they were laying out, ideas to move populations of people through redevelopment. I mean, very black and white, just very like, this is what we're gonna do. And I just was like, what? Especially because one of the areas is where my family had history. And so I mean, I gotta be honest, right? Like, I think when you have people there, it sits with you a little. I mean, sits with you the idea of just moving people sits heavy, but when the people that you love are involved in that idea, it just sits heavier. And so, and then I also have to, so I've done a lot of soul searching, through different leadership programs I've been in, different fellowship programs I've been in. And I think too, I can trace it back to my youth and some things that were happening in my youth that as a kid, I didn't have the words to really understand, around race. And around ideas of race and where people should live in relationship to their race, or, the norming around these ideas. And I started to become aware of globalization also at this time, and this idea that we're this very interconnected world, right? And that as we were seeing corporations, move their production throughout the world, and as goods and services were moving throughout the world. And so I took an intro to sociology class and I saw like it touches all of these things, right? So it just kind of spoke to me that all these things that I had been kind of mulling around, if you will, that this was a discipline that allowed me to see the interconnectivity of all of this, and maybe trying to understand it more. So that's what drew me to sociology.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let me ask you a question about this. Maybe I'll wait and ask that question later. So in the grand scheme of how this world is combined into whatever it is becoming, I'm a technologist by trade. I've been in information technology since I was 17, and I'm only 19 now with 46 years of experience. So do that
That's
math.
a lot of experience. Wow.
Do that math. I'm 19 years old presently. I started in IT when I was 17, and I've been in it for 46 years. So I can't wait to see that. My husband says that's that new math. I said I can't wait to see how someone publishes that. But that said, the interesting piece for me was, starting in I say the late 2000 period, so 2008, 2009, coming in that way, where technology really exploded in a way that was different than what we had seen before. People say technology is the fifth revolution. I don't know if that's correct or not, but I will say what it did is it made the world smaller. It didn't allow the world to be like China was such a faraway place, Russia was a far away, but it brought us closer together because we could use technology, email, text messages, all of those different things to get that. Do you see in your research or in your thinking about this work that you do, the way that we are coming together as a society and still pulling each other far apart, have so many things in common, and yet still we let our differences separate us and pull us farther apart? Do you see any method or any way that we can use a resource to kind of bring us back to at least a not too far right, not too far left, but somewhere closer to the center? Do you see that in your work?
Like a method that would do that, or the need to do that, or how you could start to
more likely
the seeds of that?
More likely the ideology of it, right? So how do we put forth ideas to help people see what we have more in common instead of what we see as differences are? Such loosely tangible items as skin and hair and eye and lips and all that stuff. To me, to judge someone on any of those categories seems like that's very short-sighted, because I'm a perfect example. I had long hair like yours, and I have no hair now. So, I still have Black people here, I think, whatever that might be. But that said, for someone to judge me about my hair or my lips or my skin color or whatever it is, it seems like that's very short-sighted thing to judge someone on. Judge someone on their character, judge someone on how they behave or how they interact in the world. Are they productive? Are they doing something to move a society forward? That said, do you see any way that we can start having conversations or begin to engage each other in a positive way, as opposed to looking and automatically see a Black woman, automatically see a white woman, automatically see a Hispanic man, or LGBT person, as opposed to that, just looking at what the person is contributing to society and what the person's values are.
Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness. I think for that question, you'd have to catch me on the certain day. Sometimes I'm optimistic about it, and sometimes I'm bleak. I got to be honest. Because there is so much division. And, I think a lot of systems flourish on creating that division, right?
I agree.
So I think that that's the work that needs to be done, right? But it's a very individualistic journey, I think, where we sit today, because you need to be able, my perspective is you need to see all the messaging and the norming and the systems that serve to create that division and serve to try and make you see someone in this box, right? And make all these assumptions and judgments about that person based on these characteristics. But then you have these systems that come along that, then create the divisions. So I don't know, but so some days I think, oh, it just feels hopeless, right? I look at, unfortunately, technology and say, well, it allows the echo chamber, right? Like we have all these algorithms that are just feeding people echo chambers and not giving them anything that sits contrary to their worldview. So you can really shut out that exposure to something different than what you think. But then I also see technology, right, where you can use it to bring people together, and to find those folks in the world that want to have an optimism and want to engage in dialogue and relationship to understand their commonalities, and come together for whatever purpose. So I don't know if I think it depends on the day. I think sometimes I'm feeling hopeful and optimistic, and sometimes I'm not, right? But I do think it's going to have to be dialogue. It's going to have to be conversation. It's going to have to be understanding that, we are a society becoming more polarized and really, but and I think that's part of why I do the work that I do. We have got to come together if we want to start solving some of these problems that are radically changing the earth. I mean, we have got to come together to fix it. And that means recognizing, but this is also sometimes counter to, United States culture, right? So when I speak, I'm speaking about United States, right? Like the we is really from a place of the culture of the United States. For me, I don't know enough about other places in the world to speak more broadly. But we're also very individualistic, right? And I think that we need to come together and realize that individualism isn't gonna help us through this. Like we've got to find those commonalities and those things that unite us to start really addressing some of the issues that plague us.
I think that there is an intention in this. I think that the division that is around us is intentional,
Yeah.
and until those folks who think this division is necessary either get a grip of reality or come to some other mind of thought, we're going to have this division. The few of us that are questioning this or sit in decision making about how to address this, I think that you have to go back many years and maybe many hundreds of years. As a planet, the earth is more brown than it is white. And yet still the story we tell is that white is right. We get people to buy in that. You have people throughout the world lightening their skin or trying to marry lighter people to have lighter children because someone told us that was what was right. And
Yep.
there is a value for having that thought, right? So white people govern the majority of things, they run most things. So to create that ideology does serve whomever thinks this is necessary well. The problem with this is, the way I see it, is domination is almost always destruction. Think about the animals, like the animals, like in Iceland and places like that, where the ice is melting at, tremendous rates and dislodging polar bears and other animals that live in that area. So anytime you see yourself superior to someone else is almost always at risk. And in this case, it's someone else or animals. But we have done everything we can to systematically destroy our animal kingdom. We are doing everything that we can, to, make money, so profit driven, influence driven, control driven, so places that fish the oceans and take all of the fish out of the ocean without thinking what is going to happen when there are no fish. What are you going to do then? Right. So all of these systems align in this philosophy, and I don't even know what the right word is, but some kind of design that is intended to elevate others and de-elevate others. And at the end, it destroys everybody. It's not just those that achieve this, so when there are no fish, no animals, no matter what kind of animal, domestic, dog, to everything, when they're all gone, what next? You're going to clone one and make one like that. So go dig up the genes of some animal and clone it and you'll get it back. Then you introduce another component. And that's why I think what you do, your work, is so fascinating, because we need people who are thinking about these things broadly and are engaging in broad discussions about them, so, it's not just that we're doing this, you spoke a lot about research methods and things. And I think that's important. We need, people to have concrete information. But what we did see in the COVID years, 2020 to present day to some degree, we started to question science. Was science right? Was science reasonable? We threw mud at everything to see if it stuck, and none of it stuck. But here we are with over 1 million people dead in 2 years, 1 million from a disease that could have been controlled if the leadership would have wanted it so. But what do we know about COVID? It affects Black and brown communities. It affects people who are disabled, people that have health issues. So these communities may not have been as valuable as other communities. So let's just see what happens. Let's just see if they just die off and we can do whatever, Mm-hmm. And then the third leg of that chair that's going to fall is this graying and browning of America, right? So I'm a baby boomer.
Okay.
I think that ended in 1964. Hope you all aren't smart enough to figure out how old I really am. But that said, we are dying 800 a day. Baby boomers, 800 a day. That's a pretty big number considering. So we made a lot of babies between 1944 and 1964. I think that's the year range. I don't remember exactly, but we made a lot of babies. So there's still quite a few of us around. But where does the knowledge go if no one has attempted to collect the knowledge that we have gained over the years? And we're dead now. We're gone. So where's that there? So the fact that we're getting older, the fact that we're getting browner as a country, says somebody should be paying attention to this, instead of looking at this as, yay, wahoo, to looking at what do we need to know to get data that will help us how to move forward. Because, people say, what these generations are and all that stuff. I don't want to categorize, but I would say 1960, the baby boomers from 1944 to 1960 were some pretty creative people. And that's not to say that they're not creative today. No harm, no ill will intended, but we were pretty creative back then. I just think that somehow or another, we need to be collecting data, having conversations, engaging people about where we're going and where we came from and how to make this place bigger. And I do think your point is it's individuals, but it also takes groups of people coming together that have common ideas. So people who are interested in climate change, that's a very diverse group, all ages, all ethnicities, all involved in that. And while there's tension in those groups among those people, at least they're engaging. So how do we do that with other critical areas like the destruction or depletion of animals, the water in the sea, all of these different things. How do we begin to engage conversations, and what do you suggest we tell our leaders, who we elect, or people we consider those who are guiding us? What conversations do we have with them? And I realize that's a dense question, but still, I would like to hear your thoughts about that.
Oh man, it's a big question. I mean, I guess I try and take comfort that, there are folks who are working in this very, so I'm just going to back up just a second. So one of the things that I did do is I was hired as a contract social scientist for NOAA to look at the cultural impacts of the collapse of the fishery on the West Coast. And, so there were people who were doing the very, so given your experience in technology, right, and your education, for those folks who maybe don't know, there's always been this division in academics, right? Like math, biology, chemistry, that's the hard science, right? That's the real science. And then disciplines like sociology, psychology, those are the soft sciences. So I just say that because NOAA was, engaging science at all levels, right? So they obviously had the folks that were doing the kind of hard science, if you will, around the biology and the ecosystem, but then they brought in folks to really understand the culture, right? Because when you have collapse of fisheries, whole cultures go away. The fishing culture that's been on the West Coast it goes away, right? And so then what happens to all these communities where, so, I guess I try and, there's things happening in these different issue spaces. For me, it's like, how do we come together intersectionally to understand how it's all weaved together? I mean, it's a big, broad kind of utopian vision. But that's exactly why I sit in spaces with people, right? So I take this individual journey to understand like all that, what we, sociologists called socialization, right? All those messages that tell me that, all those things about the superiority of being white and, the white, because it is there, right? Like the value, right? The value on people is a message that we get in our society. And so you have to take that individual journey to start seeing those messages that are false narratives, right? That have been constructed to create this individualism and these disparities to keep wealth divided and to keep power in its place, right? So you take this individual journey to really understand and to see the divisiveness of power as it exists today. And then I sit in these communal spaces because it gives me the hope, right? To sit in spaces with people who are working towards change and working towards positive social change and looking at these different systems and trying to engage with leaders and policymakers and shape it differently, right? To, some people are abolitionists, right? They want to completely do it the way of the system. Other people want to take a policy approach to rebuild the system, but either way, right? Like pushing on those things to see the change that we want to see in the world. And so when I sit in these spaces with people, that's where I derive hope. And that's why I do the work. If I didn't, I think I could get very sad and depressed, quite honestly. And so what I say to leaders, because I do work with leaders, I do, I'm advocating with the mayor and the city council members and department heads, and just trying to help them see that if you do business as usual, you're just going to keep creating those things that you're trying to change, right? So if you continue to address homelessness in this way, you're going to exacerbate homelessness. If you continue to do community development in this way, you're going to continue to have gentrification, and you're going to continue to have the Black, the Latino, the Latinx, the indigenous folks pushed out and no longer in those, which quite frankly, in a lot of places, they've been moved around deliberately because of policies for generations. We need to, I'm getting them, you need to stop it. And so talking to the leaders about, you can't continue to do it as you're doing it. And to do it differently, you need to be in communication with community and authentic communication and relationship with community. But, we all, and it's just a constant push, a constant push, a constant push, a constant push, and presenting them with the data and presenting them with the narrative, right? I think that's also a very important thing. So, in a lot of research I do, I like to do what we call the qualitative, right? I like to do the interviews. I like to do the focus groups. Because I think the story and I think the narrative can be very illuminating, and I think it resonates with people more, right? So taking those stories to the decision makers. So I guess it's all of those things, right? And it's just putting in the work and knowing that the wins are few and far between, but you have to just keep pushing.
Absolutely. I find your ideas and conversation compelling. It's just really amazing. And if I have any advice for you, I would say find a broad stage and start talking. Do a TED talk. Find some method to have your ideas and thoughts heard. I'm a little bit like you. I'm mostly pessimistic about change in this world. I'm a Black person, and I have had the world, for lack of a better term, shit on me left and right. I am able to absorb it to the degree that I can. I was reading an article several years ago. It's called a PTSD of race. And it's a profound article. It talks about how 400 years of slavery is implanted on our genes, why we eat what we eat, why we have the health issues we have. All of these things are a part of what's happened. But yet and still, I do have hope. I think that where my efforts and interests are what we can do to save this planet in terms of its climate and what we're doing to it, and people who don't believe it, people don't believe the climate is in jeopardy. They don't believe the planet is in jeopardy. They believe, oh, we can drill and get all the oil out of the earth. We can, run corporations that exude, carbon monoxide, and all these other things, carbon dioxide, all of these different things that they're releasing for the sake of profits at the expense of those that's there. So we saw what happened with Native people, right? So Native Americans were moved out of their land, moved out of their home to someplace else, and they're barely surviving. I would not say that what we have done to compensate them has done a lot, because there's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of, when we plunder these societies for whatever our reasons are, what ends up happening is just like that boomerang effect, right? It's coming back to you one way or the other. So, take all the fish out of the ocean. It's going to haunt you one way or the other. Kill all the polar bears, kill all the lions and tigers and bears, kill them all. Eventually, they're going to come back. Whoever designed this planet, if you believe in God, if you believe in evolution, whatever you believe, whoever designed this planet designed it the way it is for a reason. Who knows what that reason is, but it's that way for a reason. And we, man, find ourselves thinking we're bigger and better. And I think what's really hilarious is when Mother Nature slaps you in the face with all that logic and, oh, you're smarter than this, and Mother Nature comes on and says, oh, hell no, you're not. So there is that. But people need a voice. People need someone who's not biased. Like, you're not to the right, you're not to the left, you don't believe in this and only believe in this to the exclusion of that, but that you're broad in your thinking. We need that. And I say, talking to you today, I think you are in a perfect position. You're a researcher, you know how to do research methods. To have someone like you in the forefront who are thinking about these things, engaging people who may not share your philosophy, engaging people who may look different from you, engaging people who may be to the right or to the left of your politics, but to be broad enough to do that. So I am fixed and dilated, right? I believe what I believe, and I'm in this. I'm not going to change this, no matter how many things you bring to me. The world that I have seen has not been a kind, fair world to Black and brown communities, regardless of what kind of brown or what kind of Black you are. It's not been fair. So for me to be broad in my thinking, you need to break it all up and start anew, just destroy the whole philosophy of everything we do and start anew. It's good to be white. It's also good to be Black. It's good to be brown. It's good to be whatever you are. It's good. For someone to say that there's something wrong with you because you're that thing, the problem is with them and not with you. And what we often do is we identify what somebody's told us, right? So for Black women, in many cases, you see these long hair weaves and all these things because someone has told us that long hair is good. And so you have people chasing after that as opposed to being comfortable with whatever hair you have. And for
Mhm.
someone who's lost all of their hair, I have to be comfortable with whatever it is that grows back, if it grows back, you know. So all I'm saying to you, Tiffany, is I am so thankful that you agreed to chat with me. I'm a fan. You can count me in your corner. I'm a fan. I think what you have said here today is powerful. I hope you will let me post it, and I hope you will put some prose in there that reinforces it. You're a brilliant woman, Tiffany. Do
Oh,
more.
thank you.
Do more. Do more. And it's going to be hard. You're going to face challenges that's going to make you say, hell with this. I'm not doing this anymore. But you got to keep fighting, because we need people who are open-minded and clear thinkers. And I think that's what you are. So please, please continue your work. And if I can help you in any way, anything, you have my email, call me, whatever you need to do, and I am here. I will help you all I can. And I have a very vast, large network of people who agree and disagree with me. So you're welcome to have access to my network. So thank you so much for chatting with me today. And I hope you'll stay in touch. And I hope you'll come back and talk some more. Tell us some more.
Yeah, I would love to. I'm appreciative of this opportunity. I'm appreciative of the questions that you asked. You know, like, I'm a very relational individual, so I, you know, appreciate the opportunity to learn about you. But, you know, I also think too that when we're asked questions, that's why I was intrigued by the work that you, I mean, I got to be honest, like, kind of selfishly, right? Because when you're asked those questions, it kind of forces that reflection, and for you to, well, how is it that I think, and how is it, and it just, it's a better, it's a betterment growth process, right? So I appreciate you reaching out and giving me this opportunity, and also just to you know, be in relationship with you. So
I,
it's
I
great
like
work
that.
you're doing. I did look some of the YouTube videos. I went out and um it's yeah. So thank you.
Yep. More than 500 to date. And all that there is to help people. You know, here's somebody who's on a journey like you are, someone who's thinking like you are, someone who's experienced what you have, and here's someone you can talk to about that, or here's someone who's sharing their story. So I really appreciate that. I ask you to, you know, listen to the chat, make sure it's in compliance with your thinking and your ideology, you know, and then let me know if I may upload it. Subscribe to our channel, recommend people to chat with me. That's how I got you. Someone recommended you. So
Okay.
please. And I thank you so much. And I will send you a link shortly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.